Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with your host, Kevin Teeler, and my guest this week, Asad Zaman, the CEO of Sales Talent Agency. Asad, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. You have a great podcasting voice.
Oh, you're too kind, sir. You are too. You start by buttering up the host. That's a great technique.
Makes life easier as you go through it.
Yeah, you're going to get a very easy ride now. I do remember. I know you're not American, or not. I would qualify that by saying you're living in North America. So let's get that straight, right?
Yeah.
Geographically, but I used Americans in the traditional part of America that we think of would say sometimes it's got a BBC broadcasting voice. I think that's
like the radio voice. Like
that's
I listened to this podcast on football, and there's a guy who has a voice just like yours, and it's just a voice you like listening to it. Like it's a good voice.
Well, you're very kind. This is mainly an audio podcast. Most of our audience is listening as opposed to watching, although the whole thing now goes out thanks to Medic Media in an audio visual fashion as well. So it's all very polished it's all very polished into production now, my friend.
And we're two good looking guys. So if people
want, two great looking guys, it doesn't get any better than this. So two great looking guys on the top of their form. It's, I guess, towards the beginning of your day and towards the end of mine. So couldn't be a better time.
There we go. It's midday for me. I start, my brain kicks in midday. I'm not very good in the mornings.
Fine. Well, we caught you at the right moment then.
Yeah.
So let's get straight into it. We're going to spend a good bit of time today talking about hiring great salespeople, because that's a speciality of yours. Mm-hmm. But before we get there, I'd like to understand a bit more about you. Here's a couple of questions to warm you up. Huh? What is it you get paid to do now, Asad?
I get paid to run Sales Talent Agency. I'm the CEO of the business. I've been in this business now for 9 years. I'm going into my 10th year. So I've been a decade in the field, a decade in the business, and I spend most of my time figuring out how to allocate the resources of the business in an appropriate way, with the market and our strategic priorities in mind, and with scarcity being the reality that every executive has to wrestle with when they're figuring out how to allocate these resources. So I think if I was to boil it down to what do I get paid to do, is to do that. And if I do it well, I keep getting paid.
How do you know if you're doing it well?
You keep getting paid, probably. You keep your job.
Is that the only measure?
I think what good looks like is actually a subjective term. And it's dependent on what you define as good based on the market you're in. I think that's a lesson that a lot of people are learning, and is an important lesson. Because we don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in an ecosystem, and things like the interest rate matter. And so I think towards the end of the year, you look at qualitative and quantitative signals related to the environment and make a decision as to what you're going to try to achieve. How are you going to minimize risk? What type of upside do you think is achievable? How are you going to try to achieve it? Which obviously relates to investments you have to be willing to make. And so I think good changes every year in a really tough economy. Good might look like a flat year, right? Where everybody else is seeing a decline. If you can just maintain things, that might be really good. In a good market where let's say the interest rate is not 0, but let's say it's 2%. And the market's feeling, when the interest rate's a bit lower, people are a little bit more bullish, right? They're willing to spend a bit more. And so in that environment, you might think 30, 40, 50% is what you want to aim for. And that's the investment you're comfortable making. So I think good changes based on the environment you're in. And right now it's timely. We're all in that part of the year where we're trying to figure out what does good look like next year.
We'll have to wait and see, huh?
I think a lot of people in North America felt that the fight against inflation had been won a couple of months ago. The inflation readings back in July and I think August as well were positive. And so that meant that central banks, the Fed specifically, wouldn't have to raise the interest rate anymore in 2023. And they would bake in a couple of cuts in 2024. And so I think the consensus was that towards the midpoint of next year, the market's going to stabilize. And I think recently, even today, actually, as we record this, there's some jobs data that's come out, and the jobs report is hotter than people were hoping it would be. And a few weeks ago, the Fed had made an announcement that, guys, the rate's probably going to be higher for longer than you think. And since then, now people are trying to figure out what next year looks like. There's a big question mark, because if you go by what they said, it might end up being quite a grind. And you have to then take that into account as to what you want to do with your business and your how you want to try to navigate that environment. But there's still a couple of more signals that I think need to be seen to really understand what next year plays out like. And right now, people should just look, observe, and try to do things in a way where nimbleness is built into your business so that you can move with the punches. I think that's a lesson. I think being nimble is a competitive advantage.
I agree with that. I would think if I'm having a fight with the biggest boxer in the room, because I'm not the biggest boxer in the room, that I'd want to be light on my feet and nip about, which is probably one of my talents, I suppose. Being agile, I think, in a market like this is a great idea, isn't it? So with Sales Talent Agency, then, when was it formed? Who started it? When did you join?
So the business was started 16 years ago by a guy named Jamie Scarborough, who's actually from England.
Okay. So it's a British guy that started it.
Yeah, British guy.
I'm getting really interested now. This is great news.
Yeah,
you've leaned in. A British success story. Let's hear more.
There we go. And then the other co-founder was a lady named Sonia Meloff, and they had this really interesting background where they've been in this recruitment space for quite some time, and they both were working in recruitment advertising prior to the job boards. So before online job boards came, the way you would find candidates for a job is you would put an ad in a newspaper. And that was an expensive way to find candidates, but really one of your only good options to create a top of the funnel for a role. And putting ads in newspapers is expensive. And so there'd be these agencies that would help you figure out which newspaper to put it in, how to write it, etc. So Jamie was a copywriter and Sonia was a salesperson at firms that supported this. The company Jamie worked at, I believe it was called TMP. It still exists in some form. They bought this organization called Monster at a time where Monster was really pre-product market fit even. And they bought it with not understanding how powerful this might be. And very quickly they realized, oh shit, we're onto something here. And because the online job board was such a step change, it was cheaper, it was more measurable, it was just such a better way to find talent. And so the firm took a lot of the people from the advertising side, at the traditional newspaper advertising side, and put them into the Monster side. And so Jamie joined that team as a salesperson. Sonia came into the organization as well at the time. Jamie rose to lead the North American go-to-market team, and Sonia was one of the leaders there as well. And they learned a lesson along the way, which was that it was very difficult for companies to find great sales talent through the job boards. It was working in for a lot of different functions, but not for sales, on the B2B side specifically. And when they dug into it, they learned that the reason it wasn't working was that we're all looking to hire a caliber of salesperson that by nature isn't going to the job boards. We're talking about the top 5% of people out there. These people are well paid, they're busy, they're treated well. Those three things, when they collide, it reduces the probability of a person proactively going to the job boards. So what that meant was that if a company wants to hire those people, especially if that company doesn't have the most impressive employer brand like a Microsoft or SAP at the time, Google now, and these type of organizations, if you're not them, you have to be super proactive. You have to be the ones approaching the candidate, actually. And so they looked at the North American market to see, is anyone solving this problem? And what they found was there were a number of generalists in the market that were tackling the problem, but only really one specialist in all of North America. And that specialist was in the US. And their thought was that the problem has enough complexity associated with it that you actually need a specialist. And so that insight led to the creation of the business. They started the business in 2007, I believe 2007, 2008. And they started it in Canada because no one was doing this then, and they also lived in Canada. For the first 4 or 5 years, they worked on roles that were from the director level down to the entry level in sales, BDRs. And they did it within Canada across various sectors. Now, 16 years in, we've evolved a lot. So we've gone from that to a company that focuses on all of North America. We're probably the largest now in North America. We also have a small presence in Europe, and we're doing some work in Asia as well. We have gone from sales to the entire go-to-market team. So practices built out in areas like customer success and sales engineering and product marketing, etc. So specialists within a specialist firm. And then we've also gone end to end. So where before it was directed level and below, now it's chief revenue officer and below across the various go-to-market functions. And we were sector agnostic. We're now predominantly focused on tech, which is good because the goal for a firm like ours is to be doctors for our clients. They're bringing their problems to us, and we think the optimal interaction is similar to a doctor-patient interaction. So the development of deep expertise is critical. So the more we can focus in, the better. So now we're 80%, 90% focused on tech, and have worked with about 1,500 companies and facilitated close to a little bit more than $500 million in salary. So we've had lots of repetitions along the way. And those repetitions have built our brand out or made our brand more recognizable. Our network is much larger. But more than anything else, it's given us an opportunity to develop systems and deploy them, because we believe recruitment isn't an art. It is a science. It can be done in a repeatable and predictable way. And we've had lots of opportunities to come up with and deploy those systems. So that's a little bit about the history of the business and where we are today.
And your role, what do you do for them?
So I joined them as a junior recruiter out of university. And I found recruitment interesting because I used to play poker to put myself through university, or part of my university career to sustain myself. I was playing poker. And the table had
that's quite. I don't think I've ever met anyone before that put themselves through university playing poker.
Yeah, part of it. Like the part of it was door-to-door sales.
Were you good at poker?
Yeah, good enough where I was staying fed and paying rent.
That's pretty impressive. Do you still play?
No, I don't. No. Sadly, I don't know why, but poker requires a lot of. It's a long game. I like to play cash games, and I used to play for like 8-9 hours a night. Like the game would begin at 10 p.m. and I'd be playing till like 5, 6, 7 a.m.
Right.
And I would do that 5-6 days a week. Because at the time there was no other way to make money. Poker was the only thing I could do to make money for some reasons. And then after that, I got into sales, and then that became the main money maker. But I was good and I enjoyed it. But now I don't have the patience for it. And I think if you don't have, because now I'll play it after work, right? And I'm tired. Like I don't have enough energy to now go and like understand the table and play this game on the front foot. So I don't play as much or at all anymore, but I have a lot of respect for the game and a lot of respect for people that play it well, because I think it teaches you a lot of things that translate really well in the working environment. So that's, the table I used to play on had a number of people that were a bit older than me. So they were, while I was in university, they were out there working. And most of them hated their jobs. One guy liked his job, and he was a recruiter. And so when it came time for me to find a job, I reached out to him. I said, you're the only person there who actually enjoyed what he was doing. So tell me a little bit about how this works. And he used to he was a recruiter in the finance and accounting space. So he explained his day-to-day to me and how it works, etc. And I felt a pull towards it. And by then, I had developed some skills in sales and I understood technology. I was fascinated by it. I had a startup in university that was a tech startup. And so I found Sales Talent Agency as a company where I could kind of marry those two things. I could help technology companies hire salespeople. And that would be just this perfect way for me to spend my time. I felt that it was at the intersection of my talents and my interests and was economically viable, which I think is the magic formula. And so I convinced them to hire me. I was a junior recruiter, and then I kind of worked my way up. And now, about 3 years ago almost, I became CEO of the business.
That's a pretty meteoric rise, which speaks well for the organization and for you as an individual. And so if I'm right, then Sales Talent Agency, you go looking for the top 5%. So you don't advertise jobs. Those people don't come to you. It's a search agency.
I think we are lucky once in a while, somebody comes to us for a job, and we do advertise all our jobs because if you think about how you find talent, there are 3 places you can find them. There are people that are within your network, right? Let's say you're a company that is hiring. Your network is the complete network of everybody that works in your organization, as well as your advisors and your investors. The larger the business, the larger the network. And you can make great hires through your network. But usually if you're a smaller company early on in its journey, your network is just not large enough for you to rely on it completely. So you need other places to look. The other place is the job board. And on the job board, what you're hoping for is that the right person is active at the right time, so that when I've posted it, the right person applies. I'm hoping to get lucky, and luck isn't a strategy, so I can't rely on it. But if it's easy to try to get lucky, I should try. So I should post a job. The third group of people are the people out there that can do your job really well. They have no idea who you are. They're not actively looking. Somebody has to approach them. 98% of our revenue comes from focusing on this bucket. And we still advertise every job, and we spend a lot of money with LinkedIn to advertise these jobs, partly as a branding exercise. I think a lot of people are on the job boards, and so would they see us as a company over there? And I think there's a benefit there for us. And once in a while, some good people apply, and that makes it a super easy fill and highly profitable search for us. It's just rare. But we do advertise our jobs. But the majority of our effort and money, and really what companies are coming to us for, is to understand them and what they're looking for, advise them on dimensions that need to be addressed, right? Sometimes people have the wrong compensation, or they have created this ideal candidate profile that might be strategically flawed because it might require somebody to make a lateral move for the job, and lateral moves have red flags all over them. So we'll advise to make sure that the parameters are appropriate, and then we go to market and we knock on doors and we get candidates interested, and we help them understand why this opportunity is interesting when you look at the risk versus upside of it compared to their current role and everything else they're looking at, and then manage a bunch of those candidates through the process to make sure that everybody is able to do their due diligence and understand if there's true alignment here, because that's what you want. You want real alignment, because it's not about filling a role, but it's about making sure that you're filling it with the right person so that there's a successful outcome. And we're incentivized to do that. And then making sure that for the people that it ends up not being well aligned for, either the candidate bats out or the company bats out, that they all still had a good experience along the way. And so that's where we'll spend a lot of our time once that pipeline has been built out.
You said that lateral moves have red flags all over them.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean?
So if you think about a company that's hiring for any particular role, it doesn't have to be a sales role. You're thinking about what you're looking for. So you start by writing out what this role is, what's a job that needs to be done. And then you're saying, well, who can do this job? And so you're writing out the experiences that are required for this person to be able to do the job, as well as certain characteristics that you think lend well to somebody doing this job really well. And so the experiences are really what they're relevant experiences is what we call them, right? We think the person needs to have this level of relevancy to do this job well. Relevancy has to do with ramp up, right? The more relevant your experience, the faster you're going to ramp up. And ramp is subjective. What does good ramp? What's an appropriate amount of time for a company to have somebody ramping up is subjective to them. Sometimes your best salesperson in your best territory quits randomly, and you don't have 9 months to hire somebody and have them slowly understand the game to then become productive in that territory, because it's your top territory. You need to actually get somebody in who can be fairly productive relatively quickly. In other cases, you have more patience. So it's subjective to you as to how much ramp you're willing to have for this role. And so a lot of times what happens is that companies, especially earlier on in their life cycles, where they're learning these lessons along the way, they have less patience for ramp. And so they look for a person whose relevant experience is so high that they can slot right in. They don't have time to train. They don't have the resources to train and teach. And they need somebody to get productive ASAP. The challenge is that if your ramp is 0 days, meaning your relevant experience is completely relevant, that's a red flag, because you're leaving one job to do the same job somewhere else. And somebody who's best in class, who's an elite level professional, will never leave the job to do the same job, or rarely. Like maybe there's some nuanced cases where they're willing to do that. They might be in a toxic situation or something. But most of the time, they're looking to move up in their careers.
You see, I find this super interesting, because I'm pretty much convinced that all job descriptions, that if I have a look at a job description online, it always looks like you've got to tick all the boxes and having already done all those things. So the idea that you give someone a leg up based upon them wanting to accelerate their career, that seems pretty rare to me. But I think you're obviously positioning yourself at a different level. You're dealing at the elite layer here, right?
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about people that are in the top 5%, even the top 10%, I think they shouldn't be making lateral moves, let's say 95% of the time, and they don't want to. And the reason is that if you look at an ideal career trajectory, somebody who brings the right things to the table wants a career trajectory that's moving upwards consistently. So a lateral move is a red flag, because why are they leaving that job to come do the same job over here, right? If they were really, really good, they could move up there or move up in the market. So why are they doing this? The best ones don't do it. And so what you end up getting are candidates that actually might not end up being part of that top 5 to 10%. And so you get somebody who ramps up immediately, but the level of that candidate is actually not great. And so we need to, as employers and hiring managers, lock in on enough relevant experience for ramp to be palatable, but not so much where ramp is 0. So we have to be, and so then it's on us. If somebody comes to us with a search where they're looking for somebody to slot right in, we have to help them understand the risks associated with this, and then try to create some tolerance for a little bit of ramp so that you can hire a person that's bringing the highest level of talent possible to the table, and enough relevant experience to ramp up appropriately.
So one of the traits of a truly great salesperson is that they're always looking to grow. They're always looking to learn. They're always looking to improve. What are the other traits, Asad?
So we have this methodology with which we analyze talent. We meet thousands of...
You're going to share this with us on the call?
Happy to do it.
Okay, let's have it.
We meet thousands of people every single year who are sales professionals. And these individuals we need to have some type of a common language internally to assess if the person is good or not, or if they are aligned to something or they're not. And we need a common language to be able to talk about these individuals with each other and with our clients, because language itself is not on a one-to-one ratio, right? Like if you and I write down the meanings of a number of standard words like great and love and nice, we won't write the same thing. We'll write like, so when I say great, you kind of know what I mean, but you don't know really exactly what I mean, right? And so you need a common language in a company to drive alignment. And so we created a framework called DNAPRO. They created this before I actually joined the organization, so I can take zero credit over here, but it's a really good, simple framework. And so DNA is related to talent and PRO is related to experience. So a person, well, what does DNA mean? Drive is the first thing we look for. So an elite salesperson scores high on drive. And drive can be broken down into two things: work ethic and resiliency, which are self-explanatory as to why they're critical in a sales role, right? You're dealing with tons of losses and it's hard work. And so you need a person that has that in them. And this is the engine they bring to the table. You can't teach it. You can't train it. You can't incentivize it. You can't give a pep talk to make a person who doesn't have it. They have to bring this to the table. If that's there, the second thing is we look at their nature. And nature can be broken down as emotional intelligence, which is kind of an umbrella of its own, right? Which has things like integrity and the other elements that are important within it. So there's kind of a second umbrella there. And then the ability to strategically empathize, which I think has to stand on its own, because in sales, it's so important, right? Like if you can't strategically empathize with someone, how are you going to structure a solution for them? How are you going to look at the world through their eyes, which I think is absolutely necessary to be able to do. And the third thing is acumen, which is focused curiosity and intelligence. And a good salesperson will score highly in all three areas. And if you're early on in your career, those are the only things we actually care about. If you have a bit of experience, we now need to see what you've achieved in your career. What have you done with your talent? Because we all know people that were extremely talented that didn't do anything with it, right? Like you and I were talking about football prior to this, and there's so many footballers. Like I think there was a guy named Morrison in England who they say was probably, from a talent perspective, one of the best anyone had ever seen, but his career just, languished. You have players like Hazard from Chelsea, who at his peak was one of the top 3 or 4 players in the world, but that peak was a short peak and he didn't sustain it, right? So it's important that once you have some experience that we look at that experience, because it can be quite telling. And so we look at performance history, relevant experience, and overall opportunity management, which is career management. And together, by looking at these 6 elements, we are able to assess the level of the candidate as well as where they align and where they don't align. The first 3 things are what we think are the most important. And what's interesting is that if you look back and try to put sales into certain eras, let's say in technology, there was the era of the 1970s till the 2000s. Let's call it the early internet era. You had Xerox and PTC as companies that really stood out from a sales perspective during those periods. And because of what they were selling and who they were selling it to, and everything from that to the pricing model, what you were optimizing for in DNA was a little bit different to what you're optimizing for from 2000 to 2023, right? In this assembly line, predictable revenue type of sales system, where demand, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, where interest rates were low, demand is easier to generate. And so you didn't need somebody with scoring a 9 out of 10 on drive. People say that they were optimizing for it, but these sales teams were full of people with drive at its nature, its acumen at its, and they were productive enough because the market was easy to be productive in. And I think an interesting thought exercise is the market plus AI into the future over the next couple of years. How do you score DNA ideally when hiring somebody in this new world that we're going into? And that's something that we're thinking about actively right now.
No, I think you're right, actually. What I suspect is going to happen, what I believe is going to happen, what I hope is going to happen is that AI is going to liberate us to be truly human sellers again. Because actually, the one thing we can't replicate is this kind of communication, this sort of dialogue. Computers are never going to be able to do that. Not realistic. I mean, maybe in a few years' time, the Turing test will be passed with artificial intelligence. That's a different kind of thought altogether. But I still think the sales process is such a complex one, dealing with human to human contact.
I think it's just going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out, because what is going to happen is that it's going to change quite significantly. I think certain roles might disappear. Like, I think the traditional SDR, BDR role might really evolve into something totally different than what it is right now. And I think there'll be an acceleration towards that function falling under marketing. There was already this trend, but I think there'll be an acceleration there. I think salespeople will have help with things like personalization that will drive up the quality of their outreach and their engagement. I think it'll be fascinating to see what technology the buyer uses, because if the buyer is buying, leveraging technology, technology selling to technology, who knows what that looks like. But let's say you're selling to human buyers. I do think the person's personality then will become quite important. I also think acumen becomes really, really important, because that's where I think humans will really be able to stand out in the go-to-market profession, is really almost like behaving a bit like a McKinsey Accenture consultant / sales engineer. I think the future AE is kind of a combination of those two things. But who knows, right? Like, this technology is moving really quickly, and it's fascinating. I think people have to be not afraid that it'll displace them. They just have to be conscious of the fact that it's going to be something that they're going to have to keep an eye on and leverage really well. The people that will thrive over the next many years are people that are going to, I think, understand the market and the available technologies really, really well.
You were talking about going much more of a consulting sale, aren't you? I'm sure that's true. And I think that technology is going to enable us to do that more effectively, because it'll take away some of the, what I would call, grunt work in the sales process.
Yeah.
And accelerate things. It's going to be really interesting. And it's going to raise the bar for salespeople again.
I think it'll lift the floor and raise the bar.
Well, I agree with you. We were talking before this call started about football, which is kind of a shared interest for both of us. Or soccer, as we talk about it in North America. Is that true in Canada as well? Is it soccer over there?
Unfortunately, I think people that have been in North America for a couple of generations refer to it as soccer, but I think Canada has a lot of Europeans that are still within the first or second generation of being here, and you'll never hear them say soccer. It's usually if you're 3 or 4 generations in, then you're using those terms.
Well, it seems to extend the metaphor a little bit. It seems like you're kind of recruiting people that are going to play in the Premier League. And we know people playing in the Premier League, the standard of fitness for those people, the coaching they receive, the advice on diet, the amount of training and coaching they have to do is enormous, isn't it? Absolutely. When we see them on the pitch, that's the tip of the iceberg of what they're actually doing. Nearly everything happens behind the scenes. They've won the game before they've even got on the pitch if they play it properly. And I think that's what we're going to see with selling. And I'm personally very happy about that, because I've always aspired to be the sales professional. That was kind of, I always wanted, be the best in the business. What do you want to turn up and be second rate for? What's the point of that?
I think you nailed it in terms of the fact that salespeople will get to spend a lot more time on the craft. And so something as simple as research and admin. So let's say research is everything you do to prepare for any given meeting, as well as the admin being the updating of Salesforce and all the other things you have to do. I think both of those things disappear in terms of how they're done today. I think technology will do it faster and better. And so that saves a person time. And that time will, so if a salesperson gets back 20, 30, 40% of their time, where's it supposed to go? It's supposed to go towards client interactions. And so I think the result of that will be salesperson spending, true salespeople love the client side the most. I think they'll get to spend a lot more time there, but they'll also have higher expectations off of them, meaning that their quotas will be higher. Because if you have technology that makes you 50 to 80% more productive, well, if I had 10 salespeople before, I'm going to have less salespeople because I expect everybody to be a lot more productive. I don't need so many anymore. And so I think the interesting thing about this is that there's already quite a lot of research out there that shows that AI has, in the form of copilots, which is the dominant way of using it today in businesses, has made certain functions 30 to 50 to 60% more productive. As software developers are seeing productivity increases into the 60-70% range. And so I think it is quite clear to me that every company will have less employees and each employee will have higher expectations on them, especially go-to-market professionals in the near future. That part I'm quite clear about.
Well, listen, time has raced away from us. I've only got time for one last question.
Let's do it.
Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's the one thing question I love. It's my favorite question on the podcast. The one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career.
One thing I wish I knew at the beginning of my career. It's a really good question. And I'm taking my time to think about it. So maybe you can cut out my contemplating. But I think I was very anxious when I was entering the workforce. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I had a lot of self-doubt. I had a lot of anxiety around how my life would turn out. And I wish that somebody had just helped me. I wish if I knew it, right? If I knew that irrespective of my grades in university or things of that nature, as long as I find the thing that is at the intersection of my talents and my interests that is economically viable, then I have an opportunity to build a great life doing that. I wish I knew it, because I didn't know it. And I had lots of nights where I was very anxious and lots of moments where I had all the imposter syndrome in the world. Because on paper, I wasn't somebody who was meant to be extremely successful. You and I were chatting before this that my O-level grades, your listeners are British, so they'll actually understand this. I had 1A and 1B in O-levels. The A was in English, the B was in Urdu. Anything that was the subjects that become your career subjects were just between D's, E's, and U's. My A-levels were not that much more impressive. And so I was never really a great student. And obviously, that gives you a level of insecurity. And so I just wish I knew at that time that it's really about finding that thing that is at the intersection of your talents and your interests that is economically viable. Then you'll be so interested in it that you'll just keep thinking about it, keep reading about it, keep talking about it. And you will develop expertise in that space. And expertise is what creates, I think, long-term security in life. It's the thing no one can take away from you. And it makes you money and it's fun to have. And so that's something I wish I knew. I figured it out much later, and I was very happy when I figured it out.
Asad, it's been a lovely conversation. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Kev. This was great.
And thank you to the listener. Please do give us a review if you like what you've heard, because it helps to boost the listenership enormously.